My husband whispered, "She never reads anything," into his phone at 2 a.m., not knowing I was standing in the hallway. By Friday, I had a forensic accountant, a litigation attorney, and 50 million reasons to prove him wrong. At 2:03 in the morning, I heard my husband say my name like I was a problem he'd already solved. I had gotten up for water, bare feet on cold hardwood, the kind of half-asleep movement you make after 32 years in the same house. Automatic, thoughtless, the body navigating by memory alone. I was in the hallway outside his study when I heard his voice through the gap in the door, low and easy, loose with the particular confidence of a man who believes he is completely alone. Margot never reads anything I put in front of her. She signs, she smiles, she trusts me completely. A pause, the sound of liquid being poured. That's our biggest advantage. Then he laughed. I stood with my back pressed against the wall and my hand flat against the plaster, and I did not breathe. The hallway was dark. The house was cold. 32 years of marriage sat in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, and I stood there while the ripples moved outward and tried to understand the shape of what I had just heard. Our biggest advantage. Not her, not my wife, not even she. I stood in that hallway for 90 seconds. I counted them. Then I walked back to the bedroom, got into bed, pulled the duvet to my chin, and lay perfectly still with my eyes open in the dark. 3 minutes later, Lucas came to bed. He draped his arm over my waist the way he had done thousands of times. His breathing slowed. He pressed his mouth briefly against the back of my hair. "Get some rest, sweetheart," he whispered. I almost believed he meant it. Almost. Let me tell you who I was before that hallway, because it matters. It matters more than I knew how to say at the time. My name is Margot Calloway Reeve. I am 61 years old. I have published 14 novels over the course of my career. Literary fiction, the kind that wins prizes and gets reviewed seriously and sells modestly and sustains you in a way that has nothing to do with money. My first book came out when I was 29. My most recent came out 3 years ago. I have a dedicated readership, a publisher I've been with for 2 decades, and a body of work that, I was told once by a woman at a literary festival who had tears in her eyes, had helped her survive her mother's death. I tell you this not to establish credentials, though I suppose it does that. I tell you this because Lucas called them my little novels. That was his phrase. Said warmly, affectionately, with the indulgent smile of a man who considers himself a supporter of his wife's hobbies. Margot's little novels. He said it at dinner parties. He said it to his business partners. He said it to journalists who asked what his wife did. Always warm, always proud, always with that proprietary softness, as if he had given me permission to do this small, harmless, decorative thing. I let him say it because I loved him, because I believed the warmth was real, because after 32 years I had constructed, carefully and in good faith, an image of my marriage that required certain things to be true, and the alternative was a weight I could not carry while also writing books and living a life and being a person in the world. Lucas Reeve was 64, silver-haired, architect of 4 successful commercial real estate ventures, a man who walked into rooms as if they had been built for him, which in some cases they literally had been. He was charming in the specific way of men who have decided charm as a tool, deployed precisely, maintained carefully, never wasted. He had chosen me 32 years ago at a faculty dinner where I was a young writer in a bad dress, and he was the most confident person in the room, and I had spent 3 decades understanding that choice as love. It was something else. The morning after the hallway, Lucas ate his toast, read his paper, asked for more coffee without looking up from an article about commercial zoning changes in the West District. His voice carried that particular texture, the flat, unconscious authority of a man who has never in his life had to ask twice. I poured his coffee. I watched the back of his head. I said nothing. The moment his car cleared the driveway, I walked to his study. I want to be precise about this. I had never gone into that room alone. Not once in 32 years. Lucas kept it locked when he traveled, and when he was home, it was simply understood, not stated, never explicitly forbidden, just understood in the way that certain boundaries in long marriages are maintained through atmosphere rather than words. That the study was his filing system, his private business, his domain. I understood it the same way I understood everything Lucas had ever needed me to understand. I did not pick the lock. I didn't need to. He had, after 32 years of my reliable compliance, stopped locking it during the day. I opened the door. I sat down at his desk, and I started reading. The first drawer held nothing unusual. Stationery. A checkbook for an account I recognized. Paper clips. The second drawer held a folder of investment statements that I skimmed without stopping, because investment statements had always been Lucas's territory, and my eyes had always slid off them like water off glass. By design, I now understood, but also by habit. The third drawer was locked. The key was in a ceramic dish on the second shelf of the bookcase behind me, which told me either that Lucas was less careful than I'd assumed, or that he had never once imagined I would be sitting in this chair. I think it was the latter. The folder inside was thick, an inch, maybe more. Bank statements for accounts I had never seen, held at a private bank in Zurich whose name I did not recognize, investment portfolios, contracts. And here is where my hands stopped working properly, where something cold moved through the center of my chest. Contracts with my signature on them, several of them. Transfer authorizations, power of attorney filings, documents that appeared on their face to have been signed by me. I had signed none of them. I laid them flat on the desk and looked at my own signature repeated across 6 different documents, in 6 slightly different versions, none of which was quite the signature I actually use. The loop on the M slightly too large, the Y in Calloway ending at the wrong angle, but all of them close enough to pass at a glance. I went very still. I breathed. Then I kept reading. Buried toward the back of the folder were records I needed another minute to understand. Royal Royalty statements. My royalty statements. 16 years of them. Payments from my publisher, which I had always assumed deposited directly into our joint account, had instead been quietly redirected to an account I had never seen, managed under a company name I didn't recognize, controlled by Lucas. 16 years. I did the math in my head, slowly, the way you do when you are hoping you are wrong. I was not wrong. I put everything back exactly where I had found it. I relocked the drawer. I replaced the key. I sat in Lucas's chair for a moment and looked at the room. The Italian suits visible through the open closet, the row of architectural books arranged by spine color, the photograph of us on our honeymoon in Lisbon on the corner of the desk, young and laughing, his arm around my shoulders with a proprietary ease that I had always read as love. Then I looked at the closet more carefully. On the top shelf behind a row of folded sweaters sat a heavy metal box, gunmetal gray, the kind with a combination lock. I did not know the combination. I stood on the lower shelf of the closet and looked at the box and thought about Lucas. I thought about the man who had used our anniversary as his computer password for 20 years because, he said, it was the one number he would never forget. I thought about the man who used his mother's birthday for everything else. I tried his mother's birthday. The box opened. Inside, an amended will. Not the will I had last seen 3 years ago. The one Janice, my college friend, the one who had become a litigation attorney, had reviewed for us as a favor. This one, dated 11 months ago, with my name appearing in one section only, as a recipient of a modest personal allowance, conditional on certain behavioral clauses I could not finish reading. Below the will, divorce papers, unsigned, prepared. And below that, a copy of our original estate documents, our actual documents, the ones I had signed 20 years ago, with tiny pencil marks along the margins, light, careful, showing exactly where my name had appeared, where it had been erased. I looked at those pencil marks for a long time. I did not cry. I noticed this. Noticed the absence of tears the way you notice an alarm that should be ringing but isn't. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. The sensation in my chest was not grief exactly. It was closer to the feeling of a room coming into focus, of proportions that had seemed correct revealing themselves, all at once, to have been wrong the entire time. I was 61 years old. I had been married for 32 years. My husband had been systematically dismantling my financial existence for at least 16 of them, and somewhere in the past year, he had decided it was time to finish. I took photographs of every document in the box, every page, every pencil mark. Then I closed the box and climbed down and straightened the sweaters and walked out of the study and closed the door. I called a woman I had not spoken to in 20 years. Janice Mendez picked up on the second ring. Margot, not surprised, warm, but direct, the voice of someone who does not perform emotion at the expense of efficiency. She had been a litigation attorney for 30 years, based in the city, the kind of lawyer you hire when you need someone who has already seen the worst version of your situation and knows exactly what to do about it. I need to come to your office, I said. Today, I have a box. A pause. 1 second, maybe 2. Come now, she said. Tell no one. Bring everything. I sat across from Janice Mendez 3 hours later with the metal box, a printed packet of the photographs I had taken, and approximately 90 minutes of sleep from the previous night. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, clean-lined and serious, with the particular organized quiet of spaces where very consequential things happen without drama. She read every page without speaking. She turned documents with the methodical patience of someone building a picture, not looking for a headline. When she reached the amended will, she set her pen down. She looked at me over the tops of her glasses. How much are we talking about? Total. Everything. I had been doing the math since I left the house. I had a number. I hadn't said it aloud yet. Between the properties, the investment accounts, and 16 years of redirected royalties, I said. Over $50 million. The room was quiet. Janice looked at me the way a surgeon looks at an x-ray. Not with emotion, but with the total focus of someone who has immediately identified the nature and severity of what they are looking at. Margot, she said, this isn't just financial misconduct. This is a full demolition. He wasn't planning to leave you with nothing. He was planning to make it look like the nothing was always yours. I looked at my hands. I know, I said. Who else knows you're here? No one. She nodded. She picked up her pen. Good. We're going to need a forensic accountant, a handwriting specialist for the forged signatures, and we have to move before Friday. Why Friday? Because you're going to tell me he has something scheduled. I looked at her. He told me Monday we're going downtown Friday to sign routine estate documents. Just protecting the family, he said. Janice's expression did not change, but something behind it did. He was going to finish it, she said. Yes. And you were going to walk in and sign. Yes, I paused. He was counting on it. Janice looked at me for a moment, the first time since I'd arrived that her attention shifted from the documents to me directly. How are you? She said. I considered the question honestly. I'm angry, I said, but it's very quiet. Does that make sense? Yes, she said. That's the kind that lasts. The next 4 days were the most precisely controlled of my life. I came home from Janice's office and I made dinner. I asked Lucas about his day. I listened to him describe a zoning dispute with the particular half attention I had always given to his work stories, not because I found them uninteresting, but because he had trained me over 32 years to understand that my attention was courtesy, not conversation. He did not want my thoughts on zoning disputes. He wanted a warm, quiet audience. I was a warm, quiet audience. Tuesday, Janice's recommended forensic accountant, a man named David Park, 46, 20 years in financial fraud investigation, called me on my personal cell during the window Lucas had his standing Tuesday lunch. I sat in my car in a parking garage with my engine off and answered every question Park asked. He had reviewed the documents I'd photographed and had already found 4 additional shell company structures Lucas had been using to obscure asset asset movement. He spoke in the flat, efficient language of someone who has looked at this before. Mrs. Reeve, he said, the structures are sophisticated but not unusual. He used a property management company as the first layer and a private equity vehicle as the second. The royalty redirections are the cleanest part of it, which means he had time to set those up carefully. Years. How many years? A pause. Best estimate from what I'm seeing, he started moving your royalties within 18 months of your first book's publication. 18 months. My first book had come out 30 years ago. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. I had been a published author for 3 decades. For all but 18 months of that time, my own words had been financing something I knew nothing about. I thanked David Park and sat in the parking garage for a while with my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the concrete wall. Then I drove home and started dinner. Wednesday, Janice called to tell me that a handwriting specialist named Dr. Rena Cho, forensic document examiner, certified by the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners, 18 years in the field, had confirmed in a preliminary review that 6 of the signatures on the transfer documents were not consistent with my known signature samples. She would have a formal report by Thursday evening. We have enough, Janice said. We go Friday. He has 2 business partners attending, I said, and a notary. Good, she said, and she meant it. More witnesses. Thursday night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling and thought about 32 years. I thought about Lisbon, about the man who had been the most confident person in the room, about the warmth I had decided to trust because it felt, at 29, like being chosen, and being chosen had felt like being safe. I thought about the little novels. Every time he said it, the smile, the indulgence. He had not been indulging me. He had been watching me build him something. 30 years of advances and royalties and foreign rights sales and audiobook deals and the particular, incremental, unglamorous financial accumulation of a writer who works steadily across a long career. 14 books, hundreds of thousands of readers. A body of work that had cost me, not metaphorically but literally in hours and health and the particular exhaustion of making something true out of nothing. Everything I had. And he had called them little novels and redirected every cent. I rolled over at 3:17 a.m. and looked at the shape of him sleeping in the dark. I thought, he does not know that I know. And then I thought, tomorrow, he will. Friday came the way significant days do. Unremarkably at first, then all at once. Lucas wore his gray suit, the good one. He was in an excellent mood at breakfast, the slightly elevated brightness of a man approaching a finish line. He poured his own coffee. He asked if I was looking forward to getting the paperwork sorted. He patted my hand. Easy day, he said. In and out. I smiled. We arrived at the private business club at 11 a.m. Dark wood, heavy curtains, a room that communicated in every detail that serious things happened here and were not discussed outside. 2 of Lucas's business partners were already seated. Martin Forsyth, 60, commercial real estate developer, and a man named Glenn Park, 55, whose role I had never clearly understood, but who appeared at important moments and said very little. A notary named William Chen sat at the end of the table with a leather portfolio. Documents were fanned across the table with small colored tabs marking signature lines. Red for me, blue for Lucas. Lucas pulled out my chair. I sat down. He sat beside me. He picked up the first document and set it in front of me with the ease of a man who has done this before. Let's keep this simple, Margot. Quick signatures. No complications. I looked at him. I picked up the document. I began to read. I read slowly. I read every word. I could feel the shift in the room, the subtle recalibration of men who had expected this to take 4 minutes and were now into minute 6, minute 7, minute 8. Martin Forsyth recrossed his legs. Glenn Park looked at his phone. Lucas said nothing, but his jaw tightened. I set the first document down. I picked up the second. I read it. All of it. Then I reached a page near the back, a transfer authorization, and I stopped. I looked at the signature block, and then I looked up. That's strange, Lucas. I kept my voice level, genuinely curious, in the way of someone who has just noticed something that requires clarification. Why does my signature already appear on a transfer authorization dated October of last year? The room went quiet so fast it felt physical, like a pressure drop. I watched his face drain, not quickly, in stages. The first stage was the brief confusion of someone whose script has gone off track. The second stage was the recalibration. The third stage, the one that took 4 seconds and felt like watching something structural fail, was the moment he understood what my question actually meant. That I had read it, that I had noticed, that I was asking on purpose. Martin Forsyth had stopped breathing. Glenn Park's phone was face down on the table. Lucas opened his mouth. The door opened. Janice walked in without hurrying. She was 63, tall, gray-suited, with the absolute composure of someone who has spent 30 years walking into rooms where powerful men have overestimated themselves. Behind her, 2 associate attorneys carrying document boxes, and a court official, a woman named Sandra Wells, authorized process server and notary public, carrying a leather satchel that she set on the table without ceremony. Janice did not look at Lucas. She placed a folder in the center of the table, directly on top of his documents. She smoothed the cover once, then she looked at him the way you look at a spreadsheet with an obvious error. Mr. Reeve, you are hereby notified of an emergency asset freeze on all accounts associated with Reeve Capital Holdings, Reeve Property Management LLC, and the Westfield Private Equity Vehicle. Additionally, a full forensic signature review has been initiated regarding 6 transfer authorizations bearing Mrs. Reeve's name, and precautionary measures have been filed with the county recorder's office related to allegations of financial fraud and forgery. Lucas shot to his feet. His chair screamed against the hardwood floor. My wife is confused. The voice he used was the one I knew best, the warm, patient, slightly pained voice of a man managing an unreasonable situation. She doesn't understand what these documents are. She never has. I've been handling this. Sit down, Lucas. My voice was quiet. He stopped. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in 32 years without the filter of who I had needed him to be. The problem, I said, is that you were so certain I'd never look. You stopped being careful. Janice opened the folder. David Park's forensic accounting report, 47 pages. Wire transfers mapped across 3 shell structures. Dr. Rena Cho's handwriting analysis, 11 pages with side-by-side comparisons of my actual signature and the forged versions. Differences annotated in red. 30 years of royalty redirection, charted by year, by book, by payment cycle. Janice turned to a page near the back and read aloud. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The property at 14 Pine Ridge Drive, currently held under Reeve Property Management LLC and valued at approximately $3.2 million, was funded in material part through redirected royalty payments from Mrs. Reeve's publishing career over a period of 16 years. She paused. These are the books you referred to in recorded conversation as her little novels. Lucas's jaw moved. Nothing came out. Martin Forsythe was leaning back in his chair with the very specific posture of a man calculating his own exposure and finding it significant. Glenn Park had already picked up his phone and was looking at someone, somewhere, who was not in this room. The notary, William Chen, had quietly and without announcement withdrawn his hands from the table entirely. Sandra Wells opened her satchel and placed a set of documents in front of Lucas. Mr. Reeve, she said, these are your copies. Lucas looked at the table, at the folder, at the room arranged against him, at his partners who were no longer partners in this moment, just men in expensive suits calculating the distance between themselves and what he had done. And then he looked at me. I had expected something. Rage, maybe. Or the performance of innocence. Or the final deployment of the warm, patient, slightly pained voice. What I saw instead was smaller than any of those things. It was just a man who had run out of room. The charges were filed that afternoon. Forgery of financial instruments, fraud by deception, unauthorized redirection of funds. This last one across multiple jurisdictions, because several of the royalty payments had originated from foreign publishers and had been redirected through the Zurich account, which introduced international wire fraud exposure that a federal prosecutor named James Okafor, 14 years in financial crimes, became interested in with what Janice described as professional enthusiasm. Lucas's bail was set at $2.1 million. Martin Forsythe cooperated with investigators within 72 hours because Martin Forsythe was many things, but he was not, ultimately, a man who would absorb someone else's fraud charges to protect a partnership. His attorney, not Lucas's attorney, reached out to Janice's office on Monday morning. The asset freeze covered 14 properties, 9 investment accounts, and the contents of the Zurich account. 30 years of my little novels frozen in place, waiting for a court to give them back. It has been 11 months. The divorce was finalized in month 7. The settlement, which Janice negotiated with the systematic patience of someone who had 47 pages of forensic accounting and a federal wire fraud investigation running in parallel, was, in her word, comprehensive. I will not give you numbers. What I will tell you is that the house in Pine Ridge is mine now, the one he funded with my words. I went there last month for the first time. It is a beautiful house, in the way of things built by someone with genuine taste and no conscience. I walked through all the rooms. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I drove home. I am writing again. The new book is different from anything I have written before. Faster, less patient, with a central character who notices more than people expect her to. My editor called it ruthless, and meant it as a compliment. I think it is the most honest thing I have ever written. I see a therapist named Dr. Carolyn Marsh on Tuesday afternoons, 60 years old, 31 years in practice, the kind of listener who asks the question you didn't know you needed answered. She has a theory about what happened to me, that I spent 32 years in a marriage that required, for its functioning, that I remain legible, predictable, the known quantity in every equation. He needed you not to read things, she said, and you obliged him until you didn't. I should have read things, I said. Yes, she said without softening it, but you're reading everything now. I am. Every document, every contract, every line of every page that lands on my desk. I have become, in the past 11 months, a woman who reads things, slowly, fully, to the end, and who has stopped performing the comfortable incuriosity that made me, for 30 years, someone else's biggest advantage. Lucas is awaiting trial. I do not think about him often. When I do, it is not with the weight I expected. It is with the particular flatness of a finished thing. He spent 30 years building a trap. He forgot that he had built it around a woman who, once she finally walked into her husband's study and opened the right drawer, turned out to be very, very good at finding things that had been hidden. He called them little novels. Every single one of them helped put him in that room.